Do you use the phrase black magic to describe something that's bad or negative or scary, and white magic to describe something good, benevolent, or healing? Why is that? And what do you think the moral implications of using that language are? Well, we're going to take a look at that today. Hi, my name is Freya Serafina. I'm a women's spirituality PhD student, a filmmaker, a creator, and an adjunct professor of film and TV history. And today we're going to look at the inherent moral implications of using the terms like black and white in our magical practices and in the cinematic landscape. So I'm using film and TV as the backdrop here for how we understand what these terms mean and the impact that it has on us. Let's dig in. So I originally wrote this as a paper for one of my courses in my PhD program. And a smaller version, very focused on magic and spirituality, was published by Feminism and Religion. And I'll link that below. You can check it out and the responses if this is something that interests you. This is really like a tip of the iceberg conversation around what we deem as bad and what we deem as good, and why we apply black to bad and white to good. Now, I'm using, like I said, film, TV as the backdrop for this conversation, but really we do this all the time in our magical practices, in our spiritual practices, in everyday life with the language we use. So I'm really curious about your thoughts around this, and if you are guilty of this. I'll start by saying, in the past, I am guilty of this. The more I learn, the better I become. I think that's something we should all strive towards. I think that's a good thing. The ability to learn and unlearn and relearn and adapt and grow, and realize that a lot of the language we've been given, a lot of the practices that we practice, are steeped in the patriarchy, in colonial ideology, in ideas that maybe these people had really good intentions when they were reworking and piecing together history and background and magical lineage and all of that stuff, but that doesn't mean that they did the perfect job of it, right? You know, I have this conversation with my students all the time, especially about film. We might look at a film from the 40s or the 50s, for example, and be like, ugh, that was really not so great. That language, that theme, how women are portrayed, but it exists within its time period. What can we learn from this film within its time period? And what would we do differently today? And so if you, like me, are someone who grew up using the language black magic to talk about something bad or something you shouldn't be doing, and white magic to talk about healers and midwives and things that are good and positive, I am calling you in. I am inviting you to come along with me on this journey to look at why we use that kind of language and how that language can be really harmful. So we begin in 1935. So the head of the Technicolor color department was a woman by the name of Natalie Kalmus. And she released a pamphlet, a book, a treatise called Color Consciousness. And in Color Consciousness, she gave us like the very early version of color theory. And she wrote out very clearly what each color meant, its associations, and how we could use it to evoke or elicit an emotional response from the audience. Now, in 1935, a woman being the head of any sort of cinematic department is a massive accomplishment. Her treatise, Color Consciousness, changed the way that we viewed color on screen. I mean, we're in the very, very early stages of getting color film. and we should applaud her for her efforts. However, it was her thoughts and her ideas and her understanding of what each color meant on an emotional and psychological level that we use as a blueprint for everything that we do now. On page 139, she writes, "Color constitutes another step in the steady advancement of the motion picture towards realism. Psychologically, colors fall into the warm and cool groups, and each color and shade has its psychological implications. To build up personalities and to harmonize emotions and situations, these principles must apply even to the extent of color juxtaposition, or the psychological relation of the various colors to each other." According to Kalmus, the onset of advanced technology in the 1930s allowed motion pictures to duplicate auditory and visual sensations. This enhanced realism enables us to portray life and nature as it really is. So that last part is really important, to portray life and nature as it really is. Now, that's questionable, right? A little subjective as well. But what Natalie Kalmus did is she portrayed her idea of life and nature as it really is through how she defined what each color was meant to do, what it was for, how to use it. And this presents a problem from a 21st century anti-racist and feminist standpoint. Why? I'll tell you. If, as Natalie Kalmus suggests, the usage of color and its associations represents a realistic worldview, then the worldview Kalmus presents is an inherently racist one. Prior to launching into an extensive and in-depth description of both black and white, Kalmus acknowledges that the two aforementioned colors are technically not colors at all. Instead, the neutrals, as they are referred to, are hues but still stimulate definitive emotional responses. And here's the important part. Kalmus writes that black has a distinctly negative and destructive aspect. Black instinctively recalls night, fear, darkness, crime. It suggests funerals, mourning. It is impenetrable, comfortless, secretive. It flies at the masthead of the pirate's ship. Our language is replete with references to this frightful power of black. Black art, black despair, black guard, black mail, black hand, the black hole of Calcutta, black death, black bliss, black-hearted, etc. In stark contrast to the color black, Kalmus writes that white reflects the greatest amount of light. It emanates a luminosity which symbolizes spirit. White represents purity, cleanliness, peace, marriage. Its introduction into a color sublimates that color. For example, the red of love becomes more refined and idealistic as white transforms the red to pink. White uplifts and ennobles, while black lowers and renders more base and evil any color. To put it simply, black is evil and white is good. What? We see Natalie Kalmus's color consciousness play out on the screen in a multitude of ways. And for this video essay, I'm looking at The Wizard of Oz, Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty. And then I want to look at the Long Island medium and the Hollywood medium. Stick with me. This is where the magic and spirituality comes in. I will use these films and television series to highlight society's views towards white magic and black magic, the evil witch and the good witch, and how these views are steeped in inherent racism and cultural bias. And I'm relying on the research of Rachel Ricketts and Russo and Dr. Yvonne Chirot to do so. In the screenplay for The Wizard of Oz, Glinda the Good Witch tells Dorothy that, quote, "Only bad witches are ugly." This comes after an exchange between Dorothy and Glinda where Dorothy exclaims that she cannot be a witch since witches are old and ugly. Dorothy declares that Glinda is beautiful. And of course, in the movie, Glinda the Good Witch is portrayed as white with blue eyes, blonde hair, with a sparkly crown, a pale pink dress. She's beautiful, of course. She is sweet and charismatic and quickly earns Dorothy's trust. On the other hand, the Wicked Witch of the West is dressed in all black rags and a cloak, a black pointed hat, painted dark green skin, and a long hooked nose and long gnarly fingers. Throughout the film, the Wicked Witch attempts to kill Dorothy and her companions. Eventually, she meets her demise, and everyone rejoices. Yay, I'm melting! I'm melting! In Disney's Cinderella, the protagonist of the same name is granted assistance from her fairy godmother. After Cinderella's stepmother and stepsisters rip her dress to shreds to keep her from attending the ball, her fairy godmother appears and magically transforms Cinderella's dress into a beautiful ball gown. She then proceeds to use magic to transform animals and pumpkins into a horse-drawn carriage and attendants. The fairy godmother is depicted as elderly, plump, white, and sweet-natured. She wears blue, which according to Kalmus means that she represents truth, hope, and sincerity. Very nice. In another Disney classic, Sleeping Beauty, we can see the moral associations with color juxtaposed to one another through the characters of the good fairies and the evil fairy, Maleficent. The good-natured and jolly fairies, Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather, are dressed in shades of red, green, and blue, respectively. Color consciousness tells us that the good fairies represent love, vigor, and truth, but the evil fairy, Maleficent, is cloaked in robes of purple and black, meaning that she is vain and dangerous and secretive. Throughout the film, Maleficent is depicted as scary, evil, and is constantly attempting to harm Aurora by tricking her into an everlasting sleep. The depictions, wardrobe, and characteristics of all said characters represent a much bigger problem. If our color associations are meant to represent realistically the kind of world that we live in, then black equates to someone who is an evil and dangerous criminal, while white reflects someone who is pure and peaceful and uplifting. Having these associations about people impact the way we think about and treat people, and the most common way they play out in everyday life is through microaggressions. According to Rachel Ricketts, author of Do Better, Spiritual Activism for Fighting and Healing from White Supremacy, a microaggression can be defined as everyday verbal, nonverbal, and environmental slights, snubs, or insults, whether intentional or unintentional, which communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to target persons based solely upon their marginalized group membership. Ricketts shares the words of Dr. Daryl Wing Sue when she writes that microaggressions may invalidate the group identity or experiential reality of target persons, demean them on a personal or group level, communicate that they are lesser human beings, suggest they do not belong with the majority group, threaten and intimidate, or relegate them to inferior status and treatment. Microaggressions can be more than assuming something about an individual based on their perceived ethnic or religious group. Microaggressions can be tools through which people perpetuate violence against others, such as the continued misrepresentation of people based on the color of their skin. Classic films do a great job of highlighting and perpetuating said violence through the use of their color-coded morality and goodness associations. However, these notions of good and evil as they pertain to white and black do not stop at the borders of color consciousness. Their roots lie much deeper and further back than Hollywood. Racism is about power. Anne Russo, in her book, Feminist Accountability, asks us to consider the words of Amy Carrillo Rowe, who asks, whose survival must we overlook in order to connect to power in the ways that we do? When perpetuating anti-blackness, we are upholding notions of white supremacy and white supremacist culture. By perpetuating blackness as other, we are overlooking the ways in which we contribute to violence and harm in our own communities and on a global scale. Ricketts defines whiteness as an ideology rooted in belonging to a socially constructed race of humans possessing the most power and privilege of any other race. This ideology of whiteness is rooted in the notion of anti-blackness and defines itself as belonging to everything that is not black. Anti-blackness highlights the specific racial oppression black people face globally and is inherently linked to nationalist feelings of white supremacy and privilege through its negation and relation to blackness. Ricketts uses the following example. Whiteness is what blackness and indigeneity are not. For example, savage, criminal, dumb, ugly, lazy, etc. This is clearly depicted in color consciousness through Kalmus's definitions of color, but it doesn't stop there. The ways in which we view black magic as evil and white magic as good can be traced back to slavery, colonialism, and beyond. Color associations as they pertain to perceived morality and goodness are rampant in our society today. Dr. Yvonne Choureau is a professor in the Department of Religion at Swarthmore College, where she teaches African American religions, Black women in religion, and New World African religions, as of the last time I checked. She is also the author of Magic, Religion, and the African American Conjuring Tradition, and others. In November of 2021, Professor Choureau sat down with the Harvard Divinity School to present a talk on the topic of hoodoo titled Black Magic Matters, Hoodoo as Ancestral Religion. In her discussion, Professor Choureau talked at length about the origins of magic in the specific context of slavery in the United States and implored us to consider the meaning of black magic in the present day. Throughout history, in folktales and children's stories, and on the silver screen, we see white witches performing magic that is good, helpful, and safe for practitioners and those who seek their services. In the same vein, we see evil witches practicing black magic whose goal is to gain wealth, power, and cause harm. Professor Choureau states that black people in their collective practices and religion, especially during slavery, were seen as irrational, demonic, primitive, a strange spirituality, and a spiritual other. African and African diaspora religions and cultural practices were viewed through the lens of fetishism and were deemed to be demonic witchcraft. These assumptions were used as weapons during slavery and used to cement notions of whiteness. Ricketts tells us that the construct of what is deemed white was simultaneously created through white slave traders' construction of what is black. If blackness and black cultural and religious practices are deemed as demonic and other, then blackness in turn will be viewed and is viewed as such. This is solidified in the way that we use and see white magic on screen. In 2010, television network TLC released a series titled Long Island Medium, starring Teresa Caputo, a, quote, normal mom from New York who balances a full family life with her ability to communicate to the dead. Caputo is a spiritual medium who connects people with their dead loved ones and communicates messages through spiritual channeling. Many people would argue that what Caputo does is magic. I'm one of them. Teresa Caputo is a white woman, blonde, blue eyes, lives on Long Island, has the big nails, loves her family, and loves God. Her public practice of magic is not only accepted, but celebrated, as it is still on the air today. In 2016, the television network E premiered The Hollywood Medium, starring Tyler Henry. Henry meets with celebrities and shares messages from their departed loved ones. Hollywood Medium is also still on the air. Like Caputo, Henry is a white, blonde-haired man who communicates with the dead and gives those spiritual messages to their loved ones. Being that both Caputo and Henry are white, society associates them with cleanliness, purity, spirit, luminosity, and peace. According to Natalie Kalmus, instead of being perceived through the anti-blackness lens of demonic, evil, or irrational, Caputo and Henry practice their craft openly, lucratively, and relatively free from judgment. it is a white privilege to do so. The injustice of white privilege in today's society is rampant and widespread and cannot be confined to the practices of magic, witchcraft, or, color theory on screen. It penetrates all borders and avenues and leaves no stone unturned. But there are some things we can do about it. The first thing to do in regard to color association is to explore your own, truly, deeply, honestly. Rachel Ricketts gives us a spiritual call to action in her chapter titled White Supremacy Runs the World. She asks us to do 2 separate exercises. First, close your eyes and bring the word black into your mind. What comes up for you? When you're done, write down all of the associations that your mind made with that word. Do the same thing for white. What did you notice? What inherent associations might you have made, and where do you think they come from? It's certainly not a solution to white supremacy, but it's a good starting point to take a look at your own contributions to it. Now, when I published this article, I also posted a TikTok or a reel or something, and someone had asked me, they had said, these are some really great points. What term should we use instead? Well, I don't have the answer to that. I'm also not a black magic practitioner. And I mean black magic in the terms of I'm not black, in case you couldn't tell. So even if I had an idea about what kind of terms one could use, I'm not really the person that you should be asking. I was at a conference for the American Association of Religion recently, and I went to one of the panels on African spirituality and African diaspora religious identity and practices. And what I learned through that panel is that many black women, black practitioners in general, don't like to use the word witchcraft or witch when thinking about themselves. It's a very inherent European word, and I guess historically that's true. And so even if black practitioners are practicing what we as European-derived practitioners might associate as witchcraft, it might not be that same sort of association. It could be more ancestor veneration, ancestral practices. And so we also should be very careful not to make assumptions that because someone's practice looks or feels similar to ours, that it is. I'm also not the person who should be telling others the kinds of words or phrases that they should be using to identify their own practice. What I do know from studying women's spirituality, from being a magical practitioner myself, from identifying as a witch, as someone who practices her own ancestral heritage and religious and spiritual practices, that we should be really careful about the kinds of language we use. And that we should be constantly open to learning, relearning, unlearning, and evolving. A lot of the structures that we have in place were given to us by a very small, select group of people. And those practices, ideologies, and beliefs do not apply, nor should they apply, to everyone. And so if you're watching this video and you're thinking, well, I use this all the time and I don't think negatively about using the term black magic for myself, I understand. I do. I understand that your brain might not necessarily consciously be making the association. But that doesn't detract from the real harm that others have experienced because of the associations, the tailored associations that were given to us as a society thanks to slavery, colonialism, imperialism, patriarchy. And so if this video makes you really angry, I want you to sit with that. If this video makes you scoff or roll your eyes, or you think, oh, why does everything have to be about race? I want you to sit with those questions and those feelings, and I want you to think about where they come from. Who gave them to you? Who gave you the ideology that you cling to? And where can you let some new information come in? That is your encouragement for today. Now, I don't expect to have gotten everything right in this video essay. As I mentioned, it's a constant state of learning. So if there is something that you would like to share about your ancestral practices, about your own magical lineage, about the terminology that you would like to be seen used, I would love for you to do so. Please leave a comment and let's have a conversation about this. Let's get a conversation going in the comment section. All racist comments will be deleted. Thanks! See you next time.